investigations editor at the Seattle Times. He's worked on 3 sets of stories that have won Pulitzer Prizes. Many other stories have come close and received other awards. His most recent book took a decade to produce. It's Vendetta, Bobby Kennedy versus Jimmy Hoffa. Jim is from Cleveland and graduated from the University of Notre Dame. He's worked at the Austin American-Statesman and the Cleveland Plain Dealer as a columnist. He knows Professor Suddas very well. And he's a past president and board member of Investigative Reporters and Editors. Ellen Gabler is an investigative reporter and assistant editor at the Milwaukee, Wisconsin Journal-Sentinel. She is a current board member of Investigative Reporters and Editors. She was at OU in 2014 after she won the Fairfield Prize for Investigative Reporting, given out jointly by the Scripps Howard Foundation and the Scripps College. The winning story was about testing delays of newborn blood samples to see if the babies had treatable yet deadly diseases. It was a really incredible, important story. And she's from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and went to Emory University in Atlanta. And then Jim Schaefer, who was actually just here in October, is a projects reporter at the Detroit Free Press. He's worked at the Free Press since shortly after graduating Ohio State, is that right?
On and off.
On and off, okay. He says Detroit's the best news city in the country, which he would know well because he won the Pulitzer Prize for local reporting in 2009 after years of dogged investigation of Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick, who sits in prison largely because of his reporting, and he's from Columbus, Ohio. So before we get into it one more time, please. So the title of this panel is The Future of Investigative Reporting. But before we get to the future, I want to go into your pasts a little bit so you can relate to everybody in the room. And just want to quickly ask each of you, what were you doing your senior year of college and how did it impact where you are now? So they can kind of relate to you 3. Jim, if you want to go first.
Fighting with Justice Hill. True story. Met him 30 years ago. He was yelling at me like I saw him yell at one of his classes today. Same thing. He hasn't aged, I've aged. My senior year? Which senior year?
Your second senior year.
Okay. I had the stupid idea with a editorial cartoonist at the Lantern at Ohio State where I went to run for undergraduate student government, an organization that college newspapers traditionally feud with. And our newspaper and their undergraduate student government was no exception. We ran, I thought it was a joke, and we won. So I had to come back for a 3rd senior year. But I was also working 30 hours a week in the Dayton Daily News State House Bureau. I got to see Mr. Suddas at work doing great journalism covering the legislature in Ohio. And I learned from some really good reporters about political reporting when I was a senior.
Very cool.
So when I was a senior, I was a little late to the journalism game. I was a business major at Emory, and I had a journalism co-major, but I wasn't part of the student media or anything like that. I had one internship, but really all I did was file things. I wrote like one brief about nudists in North Georgia, but that was like, so I didn't have a ton of journalism experience, but I was in the business school, and I was taking these like marketing and finance classes, and I was like, ugh, this is so boring. And I was also a journalism co-major, and I didn't really want to be a journalist, but then I had this really great professor who taught journalism ethics and narrative writing. So I graduated in May of 2003, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to get a job. So I was kind of deciding between working with international nonprofits or doing journalism, and I was like, if I don't try to become a reporter, I feel like I'm going to have a quarter life crisis, and I'm going to want to be a reporter then. So I went and moved to Minnesota, applied for jobs, and got a job at a really small newspaper in Minnesota.
Senior year, okay, so I was in pre-med, then I switched to American history, American studies, and so I didn't know what I was going to do. So after I graduated, I was painting houses in South Bend and applied to the PhD program at UT Austin. And so most of my friends were all my sort of foxhole buddies from freshman pre-med. And, you know, if someone said, oh, you're going to be a journalist, I was like, you know, I can't write my name. What are you talking about? So as it turned out, I fell in love with journalism as a grad student and just I did my master's thesis on 1920s journalists in Chicago, and I thought, this is way more interesting than getting a PhD, so I quit the program with the master's, went to Chicago to break into you know, one of the most rollicking journalism scenes in the country. And you know, long story short, here I am. So backed into it.
Very cool. And then I wanted to just get this out of the way out front. I wanted to just ask each of you, what do you consider the strongest story you've ever told, and why? Was it impact? Was it the way you reported it? Was it the topic? What, you know, what? So, favorite and/or strongest, and why?
Are we gonna go to worst after that, or are we not? Are
We can if you want to.
That's easy.
Well, I mean, no story I've ever done has ever compared to writing about the mayor of Detroit and having it result in criminal charges and sending the guy to jail. So I think I'll be trying to match that story forever. It was just such a unique set of circumstances and years of building sources that all culminated at the right time, with a bunch of luck also mixed in with it. So to me, that's far and away, you know, the most powerful story I've ever worked on.
Mine was probably the newborn screening story that Will mentioned, and it was kind of for two reasons. Number one, that story was based a lot on data. It was actually pretty simple data when it all comes down to it, but the reason that was important was because it was something that people couldn't argue with, right? So this was something that people didn't think was a problem. We showed through data that it was, and as a result, you know, there was massive change throughout the country, which ultimately ended up saving kids' lives. So that's the most powerful, for sure.
So, was it the most powerful? The most powerful, well, the one that had the most powerful impact on me was probably the first investigation I did, and so everything fell into place. It was about slumlords, and so there was a councilwoman who actually was a slumlord, and this was, I can't believe how easy this was. And so she was running all these slum properties, and then she was actually got Section 8 HUD money for these rentals, but then she would chase the people out and shoehorn in private tenants, but the HUD money kept coming. So I would just go there and they would show me their checks to her, and then I had the government checks, and she deposited both. So she went to prison. Oh, and oh, by the way, part 3 was a lot of her properties, I had all these fires. So she had an arson ring, and then the arsonists, who guys set them on fire, a couple of them, Reggie and Willie, they signed affidavits saying that she asked them to set them on fire. And one of them, not the ones they said, actually did go on fire and killed a family in this mixed neighborhood. And so each story seemed to, like, part 3 was better than part 2. Part 2 was better than part 1. And it was my first project, and it was like, just, I mean, it was just, we just laid her out, and I just thought, this is so great. And I was just, I don't want to be a columnist anymore. I got to stick with this. I'm going to be an investigative journalist. So that was the most powerful for me. And you know, I was probably, I don't know, I was probably 30 years old at the time, and I just never looked back after that.
And no doubt, all 3 of those projects are very impressive. It took lots of time, but
It
can
took 6 weeks.
Okay, so no, so that's perfect. That goes exactly to my point.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so that goes exactly to my point. I mean, I want people in the room to be able to understand what this took. So, I mean, was it basically just reporting every day? Because I think people think of investigative journalists, investigation, and they think, oh my gosh, it takes a year and there's all this stuff and I don't know how to do any of this. I can't possibly ever do this. But, you know, well, can you talk about that and either how you break it down or how is it a day at a time, an hour at a time, a story at a time, or what is it?
In regards to the story I just told you about, or in general?
In general, I guess, or yeah.
It depends. I mean, over time, you develop a sense for how long a story is going to take. Now, you may be off base because of some unforeseen circumstances, and you might not know that once you start publishing things, other things are going to develop because of that. The mayor stuff, for example, we didn't know we were going to write stories that would send the guy to jail eventually, but 6 years of investigative reporting ended up in that because we started peeling away layers. And if somebody would have told me, or if we would have told our editors, hey, we're going to write about the same guy for 6 years, I don't think they would have gone for it up front. But because it was sort of a running investigation for all that time, it built upon itself, and it also put us in a position to get the information that it took to really completely peel the onion, to get to the center of what was really going on there. That was a really once-in-a-lifetime sort of experience, I think. Other things, you investigate them for a couple days and put them in the paper. I mean, it varies dramatically. We did a story once on a guy that the University of Michigan was recruiting out of Miami, and they announced this recruit, and the sports guy and I were backgrounding this guy, and for some reason it all came together. He got the guy's family, he got the guy's old coach, I got all these court records to show what a terrible history this kid had that U of M didn't know about. And we put together this investigative piece in one day that people thought we had held on to for months, just waiting for Michigan to announce him as a recruit and then embarrass them. But no, we did it all in one day because we got lucky and because things fell in place and we were working hard. So it's hard to tell how long these things take. Would you agree?
It is, I would agree. So that the story I was talking about, that took me 5.5 months. That was a story that actually kind of needed to take that long because it was based on requesting data from all over the country and then analyzing it. So it took me a long time. I worked a lot, especially in like the last 3 months. I track my spending on mint.com. If you guys don't use it, you should use mint.com. That month, in October and November, my spending was down like $1,000 because I didn't do anything and I like didn't eat. So, but that's kind of a rarity, I think. So there are other really good stories that you can turn a lot quicker. The story I get emailed about the most to this day was a story I did in 2007. It took me like, I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe. It was an investigation on companies that were withholding child support pay. So the way child support works is the company takes the child support out of usually the father's check and sends it to the state, and then the state gives it to the mother. And so what was happening was these companies were taking the money out of the check and they weren't sending it over to the state. So this was like actually, believe it or not, a big problem in Wisconsin. So I did a story about that. It was pretty easy. It was like really basic data analysis, super basic actually. Like a 5th grader could do it. But it was a really important story because think about it. These poor people, they are in a really bad situation. And anyway, so I still get emails about that story. I just got one last week.
So, yeah, you can do a quick turn like that. It took me 6 weeks. It seems like a lot of time, but really, it was, what does she own? Go pull the inspection reports on all the properties. That took a few days, and then just knock on all the doors and get the HUD records. That didn't take long. And then, wait a minute, so-and-so's supposed to live here, but the mailbox in this 4 unit shows somebody else's name. Wait a minute, bingo. People signing affidavits. You can really turn something quickly. And if you know the techniques, you know what the records are, it's not, you're right, a couple days, you can do it on the fly, just like Jim was saying. So it's doable if you apply the sort of techniques that you've heard about today.
And that's a good point. And to the point about the techniques and kind of learning what to do and learning how to get it done, and what resources should students who want to investigate institutions of power, want to hold people accountable, want that to be their goal in their career, what resources should they be looking at? And I think another good question is, what journalism should they be reading? What's being done right now, or what outlets, or what kind of places should they be looking at? We don't have to start with you, Jim, since I keep...
I'm looking at Jim because he's the editor. I just do what my editor tells me to do.
I would, be student members of IRE. Go to ire.org. They have extra. It's like, list of a lot of Watchdog, the kind of journalism we're talking about, writ large, writ small, and I would, I'd read that stuff. If you want to investigate, look into, sports, football teams, sports authorities, real estate fraud, housing, slumlords, you just go to the database of all the investigative stories that have been entered into this journalism contest since 1975. So you got 40 years, thousands and thousands of examples in the subject you're interested in, and they have attached to them these questionnaires that sort of are the blueprint for how they did the story. And so for, just sort of from learning purposes, that would be my number one resource. If someone said you can have anything, that you can have, the super duper LexisNexis that law enforcement has, that has credit header, credit agency, and license plate and phones, and just all the secret squirrel stuff that we're not entitled to as journalists, but are made available through these private companies to the NSA and FBI and everything. I would still say, I think I would still take the IRE resources over that. Maybe not. I mean, the other one, it's not even it's a moot point because I'm not going to get that one. So anyway, I would say that would be my number one.
So Jim stole my suggestion of IRE, but in addition to IRE,
See, we're
and
brilliant.
again,
We both think alike.
but you got a conflict of interest here, current board member, former board member, but I would say read a lot of stuff. So I try to read. I read the Wall Street Journal every day, which is like kind of boring a lot of the time. And I just try to read a lot of different. I try to read about things that I'm not very interested in. Because I find as a reporter, you end up working on things that you don't really care about, but that's actually a good thing. So I actually don't really care about many things, and so, but I can investigate a lot. I can investigate basically anything because everything is important to somebody. So
Not you.
just not me. I just don't really care about everything. So that's why
She just doesn't care.
it's important to like know about a lot of different things. So that's one reason I read print versions of like almost all the newspapers because I don't want to miss something. The reason I like to read a print newspaper is because you come across things that you wouldn't normally click on. So that's why I kind of like force myself to do that. You can do that on a website too. Just make sure you click on things that you don't know about. I think you're generally inclined to read about something that you already know something about. I would tell you to kind of challenge that instinct in yourself. And then the other thing is to work with people who are older than you, because they actually are like pretty wise, and they know a lot of stuff, and they will tell you these things, and you're not going to get that from working with somebody your same age. So you might be better at like all your sweet digital skills than they are, which like congratulations, but they know there's a lot of value in source building and knowing an industry or knowing a beat. So try to take advantage of that and pay attention.
I have mad digital skills, by the way, so.
He does.
Follow me at Detroit Reporter tonight, please.
He's periscoping it right now.
I'm periscoping my pants leg right now, which got a lot of views the other night. One other practical piece of advice, if you're looking for good investigative journalism, go through the Pulitzer website. They go back for years, and they have the links to the actual stories. You can do that with other major investigative prizes like the Worth Bingham and the Goldsmith Award and the Selden Ring out of California. These all go to great investigative projects, and they're out there on the web. You can find them pretty easily.
One thing about the future of investigative reporting, right, is that there might be less of it. I mean, we've talked a lot while you guys have been here the last couple of days about challenges to doing watchdog reporting, about shrinking budgets at newspapers, about cuts to watchdog and investigative reporting staff. So the first question I want to ask on that front is, why does that concern you, or what are your worries if there are fewer watchdogs or investigative journalists in newsrooms?
Well, I mean, so obviously, I think it's a problem for America, for society, right? Not just for America. It's a problem mostly for just society. But I actually think there's a ton of great investigative reporting going on out there. There's a ton of new news outlets doing it. As I mentioned earlier, IRE, we have our highest membership numbers we've ever had in the history of IRE. So people are clearly interested in it. People are clearly committed to learning how to do it. So I think those are all good signs.
Yeah.
I'm really concerned about it. I think these two are very fortunate that they still work at, and I do too to a certain extent, work at a fully staffed newspaper. Journalism is down by half the number of reporters that we have in this country. And there's more stuff than we can cover. So if you want to do this, there's plenty of room for you. Getting somebody to employ you to do it is your challenge. Investigative reporting is expensive. You're not in the paper every day or on the website every hour, and you get stared at by other people in your newsroom who are on the web every day and are chatting with readers and doing all the other stuff they're being told to do. We're missing big stories out there. We're late on stories that are out there around the country. The Flint water crisis is a pretty good example in my state of something we could have been on faster. We were on it, we just weren't on it with the resources that it probably needed to have. So I think there's room. I think there is always going to be a need for investigative reporting. We're in a weird space right now, though, because it's expensive and people say they want it, and by people I mean employers, not these guys' employers because they're still doing well. Employers don't like spending a lot of resources on it as much as they used to. That's a fact.
But when you guys grow up, you can become employers, and you can become bosses, and you can choose to focus on, hopefully, on the right kind of things, the things that need to be told.
Please.
Please do that. You can hire all of them.
I'm kind of bullish on it, actually. So I think it's easier to do great stories than it used to be. There are fewer journalists, but the IRE membership is up. The number of investigative entries into the Pulitzers is up, but they opened up the magazines last year. And so a lot of the data, a lot of the resources are way easier to obtain. More and more people have been trained, have the kind of chops today that you're learning that people just didn't have. You can move faster, you can find out stuff more quickly. We've got huge investigative newsrooms that didn't exist before. BuzzFeed News has 19 member, maybe it's up to 20 now, investigative team that didn't exist 3 years ago. ProPublica's 30 plus, Center for Public Integrity, slightly below that, the Center for Investigative Reporting, Reveal, out of California. I mean, these are huge newsrooms where they're not just covering sports. I mean, it's just, your job is watchdog investigative journalism. So they're partnering up. I mean, they're a force. So I think we're in a transitional phase, but I think that, I guess if you took, so if you took the reporters and you put their number under here, and then you put as the numerator, like how much investigative skills or how much data skills or their public record skills, and that ratio, I think, is higher today than it's ever been. Because, I mean, sort of the glory days, there was really very little investigative reporting in the 50s, there was more in the 60s, alternative press, countercultural stuff. I mean, there were so few, and you read these old books from the 70s, post-Watergate, like The Investigative Journalist, or there was one called Typewriter Guerrillas, and I mean, there's like 4 or 5 of these that came out. Len Downey Jr. wrote one of them. So of course, this was when I was like cutting my teeth, and I was a little baby. So I mean, I have all these books, and I look back at them now, and I'm thinking like, that's investigative journalism. Come on, or they went across the country and they could get 12 who were like super awesome enough to have their own chapter, and like, man, there might be 12 right now just in the Midwest that were way more awesome. So I think that the business model is broken and there's not as much money. I think you can turn it more quickly. I think, yes, it's expensive if you realize that, like we had 6 stories from this mobile home trap series where I only had one reporter and the other reporter was with BuzzFeed News and previously from one of these other centers I was telling you about. So, yes, it's expensive, but impact is incredible. And so I think that it's not gloom and doom. And it really, it sells. I mean, people, page views, if you're going to use that metric, people like quality. And I think it's good.
So we did they did a survey of Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel readers, and they were, like, why are you buying the paper? And for women, it was investigative reporting, and then politics and something else. For guys, Packers, but guys are idiots, so
Sports.
of course, right? So Packers. Second was investigative reporting. So again, it's obviously complicated, but it's something people value for sure.
Yeah, they do.
That's really cool. I didn't know that. That's interesting. And then, again, with the future title, at least in my mind, the future's sitting in this room, right? I mean, you have a lot of college students. You guys have asked it. How many of you want to be journalists? Raise your hands, please. So they really like to see this because they go other places and they don't see as many people raise their hands. So that's good for OU, but I think also good in general because you guys are here and you're interested in this. And so I want to ask you three, Jim and Ellen, you guys have investigative interns and you look at resumes of people that want to work on your teams and you both know what it takes. Jim, you do too. I'm wondering if you could just tell these guys what should their resume say? What do they need to be accomplishing? Or what do they need to at least be trying or taking a shot at?
Go ahead.
I would say the first thing is to just like, if we're talking just like straight up skills here, definitely work on your writing. So if we get people who have good clips, all you really need is like 4 or 5 good clips, and you can get an internship or a job, which is frightening actually, but it's the truth. So like when I was at my first job, I focused really hard on once a month. I was writing like 4 stories a day, but I would focus on having one really good story a month, and something that shows a little bit of enterprise, right? Not just he said, she said. Anybody can do that, to be real honest. So try to add a little depth to the story. So writing is really important. So be working on your writing. Data skills are always good, but I would actually say the most important thing is having a positive attitude and not being not being too big of a complainer. It's easy to complain, right? We all have, I mean, I complain about work for sure. And a good leader. And so if you're a positive, good leader, that goes a really long way.
I agree with the writing, I agree with everything you said.
But not being positive.
I agree with positive too. Because as a manager, you don't want gloom and doom. And, I'm not saying be Pollyannish, but I mean, it's possible. I've just been really surprised at how things fall in place. If you just kind of work at it and be smart about it. But if you're writing, so here's these resumes, and someone said, what about the GPA? It's like, the GPA, it's not the GPA because, maybe you really were in the student paper or the broadcast, you're in the studio all the time, and maybe you blew off your required classes.
Plus, college is too easy these days.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
right, French,
Sorry.
So, but I really like to see the letter. And if someone can write me a letter that's really well done and persuasive, and it lays out, why they're right for the job, and they've done a little legwork, so they're kind of pitching it to me because it's the Seattle Times, so they know a little bit about our history, and they know a little bit about, what we kind of do there, and you talk about maybe an intelligent way about something that we've done of note, and you have a qualitative judgment on that. So it's a lot tougher to write that letter than it would be to write a game story or cover City Hall or some police beat story or fire. So I would say the writing is sort of the number one thing that can make you stand out, because that's hard to fake, and plus it's harder to teach, and we can show you how to cover the courthouse and figure out where the search warrants are, and how to find all the lawsuits and all the criminal stuff, and how to daisy chain a criminal history back through online and then back through the old paper records and all that stuff. You can learn that, and but yeah, the writing definitely really, that can make you stand out.
I don't do any hiring, but I teach, and I tell students all the time, and I don't think they heed it very often, that in addition to the 4 and 5 clips and being able to write, you really got to have experience. If you're leaving this school without having an internship or 3, or organizing something like this, you're going to be hurting to try to get a job. The best thing you can do is experience, and the second best thing, in my opinion, of people I like to work with is networking. People who know other journalists. Best thing you can do is talk to other journalists, talk to professional journalists, talk to your teachers here who have lots of connections to professional journalists. You guys are blessed with a very fine core of professors here who have a variety of experiences in journalism, and you're lucky, because not a lot of schools are like that these days. Not a lot of journalism schools, for sure, if you can even find a journalism school. So experience. If you're not getting it, you're going to end up working at a small place. And I had lots of people I graduated with who ended up going to little farm towns in South Carolina and eventually became lawyers because they couldn't stand it anymore.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with starting in a small place.
No, there's
It
not.
works out.
But
It
it's
works
harder.
out.
It's harder.
Yeah.
It gives you some metal, I agree, but the pay sucks, and you know it does.
That's true. That's true.
And it's a miserable life.
It's
It
not
gives-
a miserable life. God.
I've seen it
No.
firsthand. You got to get experience so you don't have to go through those miserable little towns. Okay? Trust me on this. Get experience. You shouldn't leave here without 3 internships.
But
And you
if
should
you're
work at the Post.
if you're a senior and you don't have an internship, don't worry about it.
Oh, yeah.
It's
You're
totally
good.
cool.
You're
You
good.
just you'll be
Just be in
fine.
that small town, you'll love it.
Yeah, I was there for 10 months. It was not
Yeah.
a big deal.
You got
If you can't do it for 10 months or a year, you're a big wimp, and you should
Yeah, right.
go move back in with your mom and dad.
True that.
That's what you should do. One more thing on that. The other thing is, you definitely shouldn't be afraid to approach, people who work. If you really want to work in Wisconsin, send me an email. If you like are too scared to send me an email, I don't want you working for me, because you got to email a bunch of people. You got to call the police chief, who's a real jerk. Actually, don't repeat that. But you know what I mean. So like, if you can't send me an email and ask me a question, or say, hey, do you have any jobs there? Then I don't want you working for me anyway. And you also don't be embarrassed about like asking for a job, because like everybody knows everybody needs a job. So like, it's not that big of a deal. It's not like a weird thing to
Yeah,
ask.
and you know what? You would be surprised at how many journalists there are, and you like ask them at their very core. They're basically, they'll say, "Oh well, I'm a shy person." So they're shy, but the job gives them an excuse to reach out and experience the world, and to ask anybody anything about it. And so really, here's just sort of structured way for this person who maybe they're shy or they're introvert, and there's books about introversion and how brilliant they all are and things like that. So actually,
You're an introvert, aren't you?
I'm not an introvert.
Oh.
I'm kind of in the middle. I can go either way.
You're talking about their brilliance. I thought maybe.
Oh. Well, I mean, extroverts are really brilliant too. So I'm in the middle there. So anyway, I would say, to Ellen's point, things that would be like, oh, that's rude or impolite, or that's super aggressive, or just get over it, because that's what you have to do to be a journalist, to ask the uncomfortable question, to go down and demand these documents, and so that's the job. So doctors get used to like cutting open some cadaver, and maybe a few of them throw up, and they get inured to it and move on and do great things, all kinds of things that, oh yeah, I do not want to touch that, but so I would say reach out.
So I just have two more questions, and then I'll open it up to these guys. This one's quick, and you may not have an answer for it, but is there like a piece of campus or university-related journalism you are just dying to see? And it doesn't have to be specific to here. Is there something you'd love to see, some issue you'd love to see dug into, something like that? I figure, what the heck, if any of you guys have story ideas, now's the time to pitch it, right?
Unpaid internships. They're terrible. I know universities promote them, and you can't get paid in some places because they give you credit for it. I think places that employ people and don't pay them should be ashamed of themselves. And I think it makes a great story. I actually had a kid in my investigative reporting class at University of Michigan Dearborn write about this, and he got him in trouble, got me in trouble, but it was a damn good story. So I would encourage you to do it. I admit I don't understand the concept fully, so maybe there's an explanation. It just seems to be on the surface something somebody who hates America would come up with.
I also have a not well thought out idea, but excessive spending on buildings and rising tuition. Something that.
Rising tuition. The cost of textbooks.
No.
Great story.
That's not that much. Buildings.
So Ellen, Jim, before you go, if you're Ellen Gabler and you're just sitting in the newsroom and you're thinking about this, what do you Google? What do you start to just kind of like this is kind of...
I don't know, because I'm not that interested in it, so I don't really know. So probably, the first thing to know is how much are schools spending on this, right? So like, is OU spending a lot on building new buildings that they don't really need? Kind of seems like it to me, but I don't know. Like, has tuition gone up 50% in the past 5 years?
Not quite that much.
Well, I don't know. Again, I'm just making things up here.
Yeah.
But you always got to figure out what's true before you. So that would be, I'd try to figure out what was actually true.
Then you'd go see what people on IRE have written about campus spending.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, so you take like, you budgets over time, what percent spent on this, capital. I mean, yeah, you could really, you could nail that down without too much.
Real quick, we did reporters at the Journal-Sentinel, similar kind of story. Milwaukee Public Schools, it's a very troubled school district, to say the least. And some of our reporters did some stories a couple years ago about all these new buildings they had built, and they were basically like vacant. And kids are still being horribly educated, and the teachers are not paid well. So.
Jeez.
Your turn.
I don't know, I mean,
You don't have to answer.
so
Help 'em out here.
what's your biggest gripe?
Yeah, gripes are
What's your, is it,
parking.
now, if this was prison, they'd be talking about the food, or they'd be talking about how expensive the collect phone calls are to their family, or, I mean, I don't know, so what is the, I mean, you're not bitching about the weather, right? You're not, I mean, what's the number one issue?
How about landlords of off-campus housing?
Yeah,
That's a good
Is that an
one.
issue?
there is a great, there's
Boston
a
Globe.
great Boston Globe story last year about that. Very, very excellent writing. Pretty, I don't mean this in a negative way, pretty basic reporting, like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Really great stuff. It's a great series. Check it out.
And so, like my first slumlord story is I said 6 weeks, but one, you pick, the Village Voice, their state, remember that? The 10 worst landlords? And they would do this every year. Remember that?
That's a problem though, but that's a whole.
No, but I mean, you'd have the
That's
same
what
person, now you're using the same metrics
Yeah, sure.
year after year, right?
Right.
So you got the same people there every year sometimes, maybe no, it would ever change, but, and I'm not saying you do an annual, but, I mean, I work in New York, right? Things are different, that, they don't do that anymore, but, yeah, maybe housing,
I bet there's some rats in the cafeterias around here. I'd want to look into that.
There was
Like,
a great story.
like inspections?
Yeah,
something
food
like that.
inspections.
Food inspections?
or lack of food inspection.
Something gross is going on,
Something
you know
about
it. You know it.
You know it, yeah.
I think Michigan State had a fire in a dormitory recently, within the last couple of years, and that led to an investigation of fire safety in dormitories, because people are always doing things like blocking the sprinkler heads or putting tape over things that sense smoke. That's a great college investigation. See if your buildings are safe. Unfortunately, sometimes you need a news incident to spark interest in that kind of thing, and you don't want that to happen, but it could be a good peg, if you have a peg.
And the last thing I wanted to ask you guys, it's pretty open-ended, but why should these people go into journalism?
What, you say why?
Why should these students go into journalism?
Not for the money, but because you can literally change the world. That is so cheesy to say, but it is so true. You really can. How many businesses, how many jobs can you have that kind of impact on your society? And it's still there. It's still there for the taking. You have to be passionate. You have to be a little bit angry to be a journalist and want to change the world, but you can do it. It's fun. It makes you feel good.
Yeah, I would say it's really fun. Half the time I'm like driving to work and I'm like, I can't believe they are paying me to do this. This is wacky. They just keep giving me money every 2 weeks. And I just keep showing up at this place and like hang out with my friends, and then I like do a bunch of stuff all day. It's real silly to me. Still, actually, it's funny that happens. And yeah, you can make a huge difference. And
You can openly defy your managers.
you can swear.
Yeah.
You can swear a bunch at work, which is fun. You can wear jeans, also fun.
It's like being in college.
And the other thing is, it's just very interesting. You get to learn about something new
Yeah.
all the time. And remember, I was not dying to be a journalist in college. I was like, bunch of nerds. Who are all these people? So, but it is. I don't know, there's just nothing else I've really been interested in doing. So it's cool.
You're already leaning in that way because you're here, right? So I would definitely double down on the fun. I mean, even the routine stuff is, you know there's this payoff. So it is fun. You get to create a new product all the time. For some people, it's like every day you're creating a new product. You get to ask anybody anything, and you're interested in something, and suddenly you're just going to go dig. If you can get, if that's the story you get assigned, you can convince them, and you get to just dig in and experience it, and it's just, you just never know. And people are threatening to sue you, and you're like, there's some terrible disaster, and you're running out there, and you're digging into it, and people are crying because you saved their life, because you told them about ways to avoid birth defects for their 3-year-old child through Dale. I mean, it's just a kind of a rollicking world in many respects. And so I look back to studying the Roaring '20s, where everybody's like boozing it up and making up stories, and there's all these sort of competition and between 3 or 4 or 5, 6 daily newspapers in Chicago, and just the irreverence, and it just, that's what captivated me. And so you can still, I still have that, I still find that. And so, I just wouldn't do anything else.
Me too.
Cool. All right, well, thank you guys. Does anybody have any questions? Start over here.
Hello, Stephen, my name is Freshman. I just want to ask, is travel a big part of being an investigative journalist? Of course now with technology and whatnot, most of the research can go on in front of a computer screen or on a laptop and whatnot. But do you guys ever travel to places, get to know people, like develop a story that way?
I mean, the travel is confined to like nearby zip codes, really, if you're a regional newspaper. So the Seattle Times, we did the story on, say, ocean acidification. So the photographer and the reporter took diving lessons, and we had a grant, and they traveled to coral reefs off Indonesia, but mostly it was in the Pacific Northwest. So I mean, most of our stories are in around the state of Washington, and maybe a reporter was embedded with, there's a Stryker brigade, a big military base, so the reporters have been, the same reporter in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we've covered some terrorism stories where reporters tracked the tail of this one terrorist, so they went to London and Corsica and Algeria and places like that. But really, most of it's local, and unless you're at, say like a Bloomberg or the AP or New York Times, you're not really doing a lot of exotic travel. It's between the office and the courthouse, and your office in the State House, where the records are, where the people are, because the bulk of your reporting, unless you're at one of these sort of national publication or international publication, you're not really, you're not traveling the world like you used to.
I think it kind of depends. Like, I've traveled a fair amount, but that's, you're not just like going on these like crazy jaunts. It's mostly to meet directly with the person who you need to get information from, and a lot of times that can best be done in person. So sometimes that's a really important thing to do, is to go there in person.
We used to travel a lot more than we do now. We used to be a national newspaper, and we aren't anymore. We're a regional paper and almost a Detroit paper. But I traveled to Ireland last year on a story. about a guy in our circulation area 10 miles from my office who was an ice cream man from Lebanon. But he was accused of in doing something terrible in 1980 in Lebanon during the Civil War there. He supposedly kidnapped 3 Irish soldiers who were working for a UN peacekeeping corps and executed 2 of them and tortured the third guy. So I went to Ireland and interviewed the surviving guy and the relatives of the dead soldiers, and then actually I went to see the guy in Dearborn first and asked him what's up, and he actually gave me an interview. So that convinced the paper that we needed to go to Ireland and hear that part of the story. That is an exception. I saw a story Saturday. I was working as a fill-in editor, and we sent a reporter. I don't know why I ran across this story in our archives, but 10 years ago we sent a reporter to somewhere in Tennessee where a guy wanted for murder in Detroit had been caught. A routine daily crime story. But we used to send people to stuff like that. I've covered plane crashes around the country. We just don't do it anymore because the budgets aren't there, and our coverage area has been shrunk. So not as much as you would think. Even our sports guys aren't traveling like they used to. Photographers at away games, we don't do that anymore. We used to.
Thank you.
Go, Jayla.
Kind of along those lines, my question would be, since all of you do work for regional papers that do sometimes do national coverage, how do you typically decide what the scope of your story is going to be? And I know Alan spent things a little bit with the deadly delays. But how do you decide what the scope's going to be? And moving into the future where things are going to be online more, to where it's more likely that somebody in Ohio would be reading about news in Washington or Wisconsin, do you think that's going to change in the future?
So we almost never hesitate to go national because of that very fact. Like, hello, it's the internet, people. Like, people can read it everywhere, right? So yeah, we'll blow it up national if it warrants it. We do obviously a ton of statewide stuff, but sometimes you can get the impact is higher if you go national. Like, so for deadly delays, if we would have kept it to Wisconsin, things would not have changed around the country, and kids would have died and gotten brain damage, right? So that's like pretty serious thing to not spend a little extra time. And actually, it wasn't even extra time. Wisconsin, I couldn't have done the Wisconsin story. I got their data the 2 weeks before the story published anyway. So that's like an example where it really made sense to go national. It was totally worth it. But it's all up to the decision making of the editors and things like that.
We'll go national when the story warrants it, but we're a local paper, so it's got to have something meaningful locally first. And if it can expand, go for it. So, but most of the time it's not national. But when a recent one, so I didn't realize that you get sensitized to lead from Flint, but so a lot of rifle clubs, the number one place to get lead poisoning is at gun ranges. So a lot of cops who are required, so it's bad maintenance, bad contamination, bad air, youth rifle groups, workers at gun ranges. So we kind of stumbled across this. There was a Bellevue, a suburban Washington, Seattle case, and we realized just gathering the information, OSHA data, inspection reports, they're not inspecting. Everywhere we looked, there was poisoning, little, sort of a brief item here, brief item there. So we used a very strong Washington base to while we're at it, gather the story nationally. So, but that's rare. We are normally writing about our region and about our state. So it's just, just the way it is. We wouldn't do a national story that didn't have any local connection.
See, we would, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You guys are
We work from
really
local
special
and
in that
wide.
regard. I mean,
Yeah.
I've admired the scope of the stories that you guys have done over the years. I mean, I don't think we tackle them. I don't. They have to have a local angle. We do national things, but they gotta have a local angle.
Yeah, I mean, our last, part 3 of the mobile home trap had no local angle, part 1 did. So, you know, once you're kind of, you know, we've already committed to this rolling investigation, so, but if we hadn't had that first one, where we sort of set the table for the topic broadly with the Washington State piece, the regional piece, we wouldn't be able to come at it, I think, from the angle from part 3.
We don't think people really care. We think they like it, actually. We get tons of emails. Like, so I just did a national story in May. Didn't really have, it had like a tiny example from Wisconsin in it, like halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, a third of the way through the story. I got tons of emails from doctors and lab people in Wisconsin. They were like, "Thank you so much for writing about this," blah, blah, blah.
Charlie?
So 2 questions. First off, who would you say your mentors are? Or, and then in addition to that, have you ever had anything terrifying go on investigative reporting wise, like threatened by any means, stuff like that?
All right, so you're sitting next to my mentor. You're telling me he didn't feed that question to you? What's that? He did not feed
Not
that?
to say that.
Justice Hill is a mentor of mine, even though I look like his dad. He's much older than I am. Don't listen to him. I heard he's running this 35, I'm
I was told you were
35.
supposed to say somebody else.
What's that?
I was told you were supposed to say somebody else.
My mentor is not the same as your mentor. You were one of my mentors, so you're just gonna have to live with that.
That's not true. I told Dr. John Clark.
You don't feel that.
Dr. Clark was a great copy editing mentor. You're correct.
All right, so Justice Hill.
Justice Hill is one of my mentors. I've been fighting with this guy for 30 years. Welcome to the club, everybody else.
Anything terrifying?
Terrifying. People seem to think we should have been killed when we were doing the stories about the Detroit mayor. But I can tell you that the guy has never been anything but charitable to me to my face. In fact, even after we won the Pulitzer Prize for that story, he was in court because he kept messing up when he was in jail. And I saw him in the vestibule to this courtroom, and I'm walking past, and he says, "Hey, Mr. Pulitzer." And I just walked in and sat down. But he's a nice guy. He really is. But I've written about really scary guys over the years, like drug lords and mafia cases and murderers, but never really had any problem. The worst thing that's ever happened to me is I was writing about a guy whose son was charged with molesting a foster child who had been staying in their home. This is before the internet. That tells you how long ago this was. But the guy, I couldn't get a hold of him, and I needed to let them know I was going to be writing this story, and I needed to give him a chance to defend himself, so I go to the door with a photographer. This photographer was older than me. He'd been to South America, had been covering some war zones, so he was pretty rough. But we get to the door, and this older man comes to the door, and he's got a fork in his hand. He must have been cleaning dishes or something, or making dinner. And he goes, I said, "Hey, Mr. Travis, Jim Schaefer from the Free Press, I just want to let you know we're going to be writing a story about your son getting charged with this molestation." And he goes, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, you know, they filed this case against your son today. I just want to know if you want to say anything on in his defense, or if he's here, can I talk to him?" And he goes, "Oh, there will be no story." And I said, "Well, you know, it's a public matter, it's going to be a story." He said, "It's not a public matter." I said, "It happened in court today. These are public matters." And I was trying to explain to him. And the photographer, the rough guy, says, "Let me tell you the difference between public records and private situations. Like right now I'm on your property, sir, and I'm not going to take a picture of you, but as soon as I get out to that sidewalk, that's public property, and I'm going to turn around and fire off 5 shots of your house." And I'm like, "Thanks, Damon." And I'm like, "Okay, sir, thanks anyway. If you change your mind, here's my phone number." And we start to leave, and we walk out to the street, and Damon whirls around and fires all 5 shots at this guy's house. And he comes tearing out of the house with this fork in his hand.
And he got some even better shots.
Well, Damon, being the war photographer that he was very experienced. He opened up the back of his minivan he was driving, threw his equipment in, shut it, and locked it before the guy could get to the street.
So terrified, I tell you, I'm always terrified, you know, the day before publication, and especially if you're
Different terror.
after,
That's good.
you know, like people who are billionaires and multimillionaires, you know,
Yeah.
.com guys, and you're just, you know, one, you don't want to make an error. So I'm always worried about that, even if I'm not the reporter, I'm the editor, and just, so that's, it's just anxious. And then, if they've got really deep resources, then they can sue you regardless of whether you made a mistake or not, and just, you know, harass and punish and spin. So when we take on the more powerful people, that's always, you know, and then, so, you know, typically it's in print and Sunday, and then Monday, you know, what are we hearing? It's like, so every day that goes by, for me, it's just like less of a chance that we've got a mistake. And so on my calendar, so we did this one investigation of, this guy's name is Naveen Jain. He owned InfoSpace, and this, at one point before the .com burst, this tech company in Seattle had a market cap higher than Boeing, and it was, the story was all about fraud and accounting tricks, and I came up with the title for this series. It was called .conja. And so, I mean, we actually saying this was a con, and this guy had like hundreds of millions still, even after the stock tanked. And so my terror is just, I'm afraid that we've made a mistake. And so
That's good. Terry.
But
we haven't.
how do you
Yeah.
make yourself less scared?
You make yourself less scared by, you fact check, you run, you know, you tell the subject of your investigation what you're working on. You contact them, you want to interview them, they won't talk to you. Well, we're saying, you know, we've got, well, then here's 20 questions. We're going to ask you about why did you do this? Why did you do that? Tell us about this. Then they won't talk to you. Then it's like, look, we're going to be saying this, and we're going to be saying that, and we're saying this. And, you know, maybe there's like one of these, like with Warren Buffett, we sent him 34 questions, and they were, if they answered the first one, there were all these follow-up questions. But I was thinking, you know, maybe one thing will snag, and they'll go, well, no, that's not right. You know, you're ignoring the fact that the credit score of this subgroup is X, Y, and Z, and I mean, so I'm hoping they'll, well, of course, you know, total no comment, total nothing. So we couldn't even like rope-a-dope them, you know, anything, you know. So you know, that's the scariest thing. And you've got it all right, but you're just afraid of, nobody's perfect, you know. So we never did hear back from those guys, and no one's demanded a correction.
That's what I wanted you to say. I wanted you to say it.
Yep, fact check,
Fact
tell them
check.
what you're up to.
Tell them what you're doing.
No surprises.
That's it,
I mean, you
right.
gotta give them weeks,
Right.
a week, yeah, it's just, it's hard, and it's bad. I mean, it's uncomfortable, human, but, and people do all that, and you still, it's still terrifying.